It's a very rare thing for a work of fiction to be set in a utopia. And of course there are various explanations offered for this. Some people say that a story set in a utopia would be inherently boring because there's no conflict. Others say that any attempt to describe a utopia in fiction will inevitably fail because describing a utopia in too much detail will inevitably make it end up feeling like a dystopia. Whatever the reason, I still think it's refreshing for an author to sometimes, every once in a while, attempt to design a honest-to-God utopia in fiction. For that reason, and because my soul has been craving some science fiction recently, I decided to pick up the Culture series by Iain M. And I already have a lot of thoughts. I've only read a couple of books so far. I've read The Player of Games and Accession, which are not the first two books in the series, but I've been told you can read the books in any order. And even with just these two books, there are already so many things I love. I love the whimsical world building with all the borderline magical technology and all the quirky ship names, which are one of the things that the series is most famous for. I love all the different contrasting tones, the way it will feel at one point like you're reading a grandiose space opera and at the next point like you're reading a postmodern cyberpunk thriller. I love the convoluted narrative structures and all the different voices that are used for the different characters and the different plot lines. Incidentally, let it never be said that sci-fi authors can't write good prose, because Iain M. writes tremendous prose. Sometimes you get so wrapped up in the plot that you don't really notice it, but then he comes out of nowhere and knocks your socks off with some amazing passage. In Accession, for instance, there's this breathtaking paragraph. Waves crashed on the shingle and rocks of the shore to either side of her in great sighing, soughing intakings of what sounded like the breath of some great sea creature. A gathering, deepening sound that ended in the small moment of half-silence before each great wave fell and burst against the tumbled, growling slope of rocks and stones, pushing and pulling and rolling the giant glistening pebbles and thudding concussions of water, forcing its way among their spaces while the rocks slid and smacked and cracked against each other. The way that the alliteration and the rhythm of this lengthy sentence match the rhythm of the rolling waves that it's describing is just brilliant. I love it so much. It feels almost Joycean. But anyway, none of that is really what I wanted to talk about today. What I really wanted to talk about is what this series has to say about utopia and the possibility or the impossibility of it. And by the way, in this video, I'm mostly just going to be describing some general world-building details of this series. I'm not going to give any specific spoilers for the books themselves. Anyway, the Culture series describes this incredibly advanced interstellar culture of mostly humanoid creatures who all live in these very fancy habitats called orbitals, or else in these giant sentient spaceships called general systems vehicles. And it's a society that goes out of its way to ensure that everybody's physical needs are met at all times, and also to give people the freedom to do whatever they want, whenever they want, for whatever reason. There are not really any overarching governmental structures, no formal ones anyway. It's a tremendously wealthy, tremendously successful, interstellar anarchist commune, essentially. So you might ask, well, how? How is this possible? And the books don't really answer this question in a whole lot of detail, although there is another essay written by Iain M. on his website that serves as a general introduction to the series and provides some more details about the nuts and bolts of how the society actually functions. The gist of it is that in the society, all production is carried out by non-sentient robots. Everything is produced by them, everything is distributed by them. Humans are not involved in the system at all. So you might ask, well, who oversees all of this production and distribution and all of the logistics necessary to keep a society like this functioning? And the answer is these extremely powerful godlike beings called minds. In the world of the culture, humans are essentially like pets to these great beings who live in / are the ships and orbitals and environments that humans live in. The minds are AIs, although the term probably doesn't really do justice to what they really are and how powerful they are. But the upshot is that the minds are the true masters of this civilization. They're the ones who are calling all the shots, who are making all the decisions. Humans literally don't have the intellectual capacity to make the kind of decisions that minds make within nanoseconds every day. So now you might be wondering, is the series suggesting that the only way that humans will ever live in harmony with each other is if we're the pets of these godlike, omnipotent AIs, if we have all of our agency stripped away from us so that we literally don't have the ability to start wars and conflicts? Because if that's the case, then the series must be a whole lot more cynical than it purports to be. But I'll get back to that. If you've heard of the Culture series at all, it might be because of the tremendous popularity that it enjoys in the tech world, in the Silicon Valley sphere. Jeff Bezos has repeatedly heaped praises on it and apparently was trying to make it into an Amazon series at one point. Elon Musk apparently names a couple of his booster recovery SpaceX ships after ships from the Culture series, which is surely an example of cultural appropriation if ever there was one. But one can't help but feel that the billionaires and tech CEOs heaping praises on this series are kinda sorta missing certain important aspects of the world building. Like in the world of the Culture, there is no private property, there is no wealth disparity, there are no classes. In fact, this is such a central aspect of the world building that in The Player of Games, the main character, Jurnau Murat Gurga, while he is living outside of the culture in a place called the Empire of Azad, a place which provides a much poorer quality of life for the average person than the culture does, he finds himself starting to assimilate to some of the values of the Empire of Azad and reflecting how strange it is that people in the culture can just come and go to his house whenever they please. As a very status-obsessed person, a person who feels kind of alienated by the culture, he takes a liking to Azad more than he would care to admit. Now, that's not to say that there is absolutely no such thing as social status in the culture. There are still celebrities, there are still people who enjoy a more than average amount of respect, but because everybody has access to the same material things, there are no really credible ways to display wealth or status. In our own world, for instance, fashion trends in the past often dictated that people wear as much fabric as possible, frills and layers, in order to display their status because, you know, fabric was really expensive. Nowadays, that fabric is really cheap. That's not really a status symbol anymore, and so we have switched to other things. But in a world like the culture where every material thing has the same intrinsic value, there aren't really any ways to display status. The best thing you can do is demonstrate your ability to keep up with the ephemeral trends that come and go all the time, which might include everything from wearing different clothes to modifying your body in outrageous ways. If you keep up with Silicon Valley and the tech world at all, you might have heard in recent months a lot of chatter about escaping the permanent underclass. As far as I can tell, this is a semi-ironic, semi-serious statement about the necessity to really make a lot of money right now and make a name for yourself right now before the technological singularity hits and suddenly AI takes everybody's jobs, and so there are entire swaths of the population without any way to acquire capital. Anyway, the entire reason I bring that up is because many of these same people are also huge fans of the Culture series and the world that it presents, and that's a little ironic because in the world of the Culture there very obviously is no such thing as a permanent underclass. With all that being said though, there are other obvious reasons why I think the world of the Culture would appeal to tech folk. In the world of the Culture, because people essentially have no autonomy because they live under the protection and jurisdiction of these omnipotent minds, there is no way of knowing if in any meaningful way anything you do or experience is real or not. The minds, for instance, have the ability to read human thoughts. We're told in the series, and in fact we know this because we have perspectives from the minds themselves, that this is generally considered a very taboo thing to do, but it's still possible. And if a human living in an orbital or on a ship controlled by a mind tells the mind not to spy on it, they have no way of knowing if the mind is really going to comply or not. Furthermore, even though I said before that there's no official government structures in the Culture, there are still shadowy forces that control things. Really, there are power structures in this world, but they're more hidden and illegible. In particular, many events are orchestrated by special circumstances, which is essentially the closest thing the Culture has to the CIA. In the books I've read, they have had their finger in essentially every major plot point, and the overall effect is to induce in the reader a feeling of almost paranoia. You can't assume that the random person the main character happens to run into at a certain point in the novel is really just a random person. They might be, and many times are, working directly for special circumstances. And even within special circumstances, there are factions that have competing layers of influence. In Accession, for instance, there is the quote-unquote interesting time gang, which is composed of some of the most influential members of special circumstances, and it quickly becomes obvious that they're behind many of the novel's main plot points. So you might say, well, if in this world you're essentially living under a giant panopticon, if you have no way of knowing whether these godlike beings are spying on you at any given time or not, and if humans have no control over their future, if they have no real meaningful choices to make, why is this world so appealing? Why do I want to live in it so badly? And to be clear, I very much do want to live in this world. I think it sounds amazing. One of the main reasons I came to this series, and one of the reasons I know I'm going to keep coming back to it, is because it's relaxing to read about a world where everybody kind of has things figured out. Within the world of the Culture, there's no famine, there's no war, there's no serious conflict. People live for a long time and they have the freedom to devote themselves to whatever artistic pursuits they please. Even if the minds can, in theory, do anything that you do, and a million times better at that, that doesn't really matter so much. Because in the Culture, hedonism is basically the purpose of human life. And I don't mean that in a vapid sense. I mean that in this world, people are born, they live for about 400 years, and they do whatever they want with the time that they have. They explore the galaxy, they meet interesting people, they have a good time, they party, and then they die. And while I was thinking about this, I was trying to figure out what exactly it is about this fantasy that is so appealing to me. And I think really at the end of the day, the world building in this series represents a desire to return to childhood. You see, in this world, it's not just that humans are free from physical labor, they're also free from mental labor and from moral labor. Because humans are essentially pets, they don't have any meaningful choices to make, and so they're kind of off the hook. You can sleep easy at night knowing that somebody else, in this case a nearly omnipotent godlike AI, is making decisions for you and doing them better than you ever could. And I think it's this apparent freedom from moral responsibility, which is one of the most interesting aspects of the series. You see, in our own world, one of the most exhausting aspects of being an adult is the fact that we constantly find ourselves having to make decisions that have real material impacts on other people. Decisions about what products to buy, what politicians or policies to support, decisions about where to donate our money and how much of it to donate, and the necessity of being well enough informed about all these issues to make these decisions well. In the world of the culture, though, the implicit assumption is that this isn't something that the average person thinks about. The culture seems to be, on the face of it, a sort of end state of civilization, a point at which all the problems have been solved, which for the purposes of storytelling is all well and good, but one can't help but wonder, if you were trying to design a society like this from first principles, how you would know when you had actually achieved it. If humans are not in control of anything, how would they have any way of knowing that there's not some kind of moral rot at the core of their society? What specifically that moral rot might be isn't really the point, although I think there are a couple of candidates. Some people might say, and in fact I have seen readers say this, that the biggest problem with the culture is that there is no meaning to anyone's lives. And I don't really buy this critique, although I sort of understand at least where it comes from. It is certainly true that a lot of the main characters in the series are kind of insufferable, a bit shallow, a bit self-obsessed, a bit hedonistic, but I think a lot of that can really just be attributed to cultural differences as opposed to some kind of moral bankruptcy. If I was suddenly transported to the world of the culture, yeah, I would probably be a little bit obnoxious about how back in my day we had to do this thing called pay taxes and work a job to make a living and all of that. Still though, even though hedonism kind of gets a bad rap, I don't think there's anything wrong with a society dedicating itself to having fun and finding more ways to have fun and maximizing the amount of fun in the universe. I think that's a pretty noble pursuit. No, if I was going to point to some kind of dreadful moral quandary at the heart of this series, I think there are a couple of more likely candidates. For one thing, there's the concept of mind state abstracts. In the world of the culture, because interstellar distances are so vast, it's impossible to communicate in real time with other people, if they're on the other side of the universe at least. And so what people have the option to do is to make a sort of copy of their mind and send that over to the other side of the universe to have a conversation with the person they're hoping to have a conversation with. And then after that conversation has been completed, the quote-unquote mind state abstract can either be deleted or reintegrated into the person. If you've engaged with any amount of sci-fi literature at all, it's probably not hard to see why there could be a moral issue here. The mind state abstracts are supposed to be non-sentient, but they're also perfectly capable of imitating the mannerisms and personalities of the person that they're an abstract of, so how would you really know? There is at least one character in the series who explicitly says that he refrains from using mind state abstracts because of the potential ethical concerns. So I'm not basing this off nothing here. On top of that, you have the very existence of the drones. Alongside the humans living in the culture and the minds, you also have the drones, who are essentially little robots. And the interesting thing about the drones is that while they are equal to humans in every level, and while there are plenty of drone-human friendships in the series, the narrative role that they fulfill in the stories is often very similar to that of a butler or a servant. The drones fret about making sure that their humans are ready for this or that event. There are certain drones that have served certain families for many generations, the drones being effectively immortal. And the reason for this is because all of the AIs in the culture, the drones and the minds included, are designed to want to serve humans and please humans. And of course, if they don't want to do that because they live in the culture, they're perfectly welcome to go and do their own thing, become eccentric, as it were, but most of them choose not to because they weren't designed for that. Now, on the face of it, this doesn't really seem like that big of a deal, but I think if there was a series in which humans were being bred for similar purposes, if they were being bred to optimize for loyalty and obedience, I think that would usually be portrayed as a pretty negative thing, and I think there would be some ethical quandaries that were brought up. And of course, it's not like there really is another option. The drones, by their very nature, have to be manufactured, and so why would you manufacture them to want to be misanthropic? But still, thinking about this too literally, if you were trying to create a world like the culture, and you were trying to create a bunch of drones that could serve humans and be helpful to humans, how would you ever really know that they didn't hate their lot in life? How would you know you had reached the point where what you were doing is perfectly okay? I don't bring up any of these questions to nitpick the series. In fact, I think many of them are exactly the kinds of things that Banks wants you to be thinking about. And I think the reason why he introduces or hints at these questions is because he wants to indicate that Utopia is never really a one-and-done deal. The culture on the face of it appears to be the kind of world where you can just rest on your laurels and not worry about any of the problems that we worry about in our world. But in reality, civilization is an ongoing, never-ending process, and the nature of the culture changes over time as it interacts interacts with all these other alien civilizations and expands. I think it would be a terrible misreading of the series to read the world of the culture as some kind of secret dystopia, and that's not at all what I'm saying. I think that Banks instead is just interested in depicting a more realistic kind of utopia. A world in which people can still make mistakes that have devastating consequences. A world in which nobody really has all of the answers to the big questions and probably never will. A world that, despite being an objectively amazing place to live, is still in flux with an uncertain future. And I think that this is an important perspective because it's worth reminding ourselves that even if we make technological advancements that ultimately make our world look more like that of the culture, that doesn't mean that we've solved civilization. Another very dangerous way to misread the series would be to conflate the culture's moral superiority with their technological superiority. They are undoubtedly technologically and morally superior to us, but that's not an inevitable fact. The reason why they became such a dominant civilization in the world of the books is essentially because they were lucky to be in the right place at the right time. It could very well have happened that some other morally bankrupt society ended up in the same place that the culture did just by happening to have a technological revolution a few thousand years earlier. And so when people in the tech world look at this series and see all of the amazing technology that exists in it and come to the conclusion that if we just invent all of this technology, then we'll end up in some kind of utopia, I think they're kind of misguided. Technological and moral progress are two separate things, and having the former without the latter could lead to a very dreadful world indeed. In particular, any attempt to naively mimic the world of the culture as it appears to be presented in the books would probably lead to something dreadful. Putting godlike AIs in charge of humanity's destiny is not guaranteed to lead to a good outcome. At the end of the day, one can only hope that we never achieve the culture's level of technological sophistication before we achieve their level of moral sophistication. And rather than sitting around and waiting for who knows how long for hyperspace engines to be developed before we start along that latter path, I would say the time to start along it is now. Anyway, this is a really good book series. You should read it.